"They said you eat woman," the black woman said. Her voice steady and clear as dust swirled around his isolated cabin. She looked at the giant cowboy, then took a step forward. She wrapped her arms around the massive frame that had terrorized an entire frontier town. The people of Dusty Creek had crossed streets for 3 years to avoid the enormous former lawman. They whispered tales of his violence, keeping their daughters away. They expected him to die alone, consumed by whatever darkness had turned their respected sheriff into a monster. But this fearless woman from the east arrived, searching for her missing brother. Armed with nothing but courage and a faded photograph, her embrace shattered years of guilt and rage. It awakened something the giant had buried deep inside. But what she didn't know was that her brother's disappearance was tied to the same bloody event that had destroyed the giant's life. And the killers who shattered both their worlds were already returning to finish what they started. Would her faith be enough to save them both? Or would the approaching danger destroy the only light that had touched his darkness in years? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The axe blade bit deep into the oak log with a thunderous crack that echoed across the barren stretch between Jeremiah Wilder's cabin and the town of Dusty Creek. At 6'8", his massive frame cast a shadow that seemed to swallow the late afternoon sun. 3 years of isolation had carved deep lines into his weathered face. His once proud sheriff's star now gathered dust on a forgotten shelf inside his cabin. Children dared each other to approach his property line. Mothers clutched their daughters closer when his name came up. The stories had grown with each telling until the truth was buried beneath layers of fear and superstition. Sheriff Tom Bradley rode past the cabin twice a week, always slowing his horse, but never stopping. The town preferred their monster to remain a mystery. It was easier to blame the giant for their nightmares than to remember the man who once protected them. Malene approached the ticket master, a thin man with nervous eyes who kept glancing toward the saloon. "Excuse me, sir. I'm looking for information about my brother, Samuel Hayes. He was last seen in this area." The ticket master's expression grew uncomfortable. He shook his head. "Don't know nothing about no Hayes. You might want to try the sheriff's office." The sheriff's office sat at the far end of the main street, its wooden sign creaking in the desert wind. Malene found him cleaning his rifle, his movements methodical and practiced. "Sheriff, I'm searching for my brother, Samuel Hayes. He wrote to me 6 months ago from this territory." Bradley looked up, studying her face. "Samuel Hayes. Name sounds familiar, but I can't place it. This territory sees a lot of drifters. Most don't stay long." Malene pushed on. "He mentioned working with a local lawman, said he'd found purpose here." The sheriff's hand stilled on his rifle. His eyes grew distant, as if remembering something painful. "Ma'am, I need to warn you about someone. There's a man living outside town. Used to be sheriff here before me. People call him the Giant. He's not right in the head anymore. Dangerous, some say." Malene felt a chill. "What happened to him?" Bradley shifted uncomfortably. "Lost his family to outlaws a few years back. Something broke inside him. Now he lives alone and folks tell stories. They say he don't take kindly to women approaching his place." Malene adjusted her grip on her satchel. "What kind of stories?" Bradley's eyes met hers. "Foolish talk, mostly. But I'd stay clear of his cabin if I were you. Nothing good comes from stirring up old ghosts." Malene left the sheriff's office with a new lead and a growing sense of dread. The sun began its descent toward the western mountains as she walked through the town's dusty streets. Shopkeepers emerged to sweep their stoops. Children played games in the fading light. She noticed how the shadows stretched across the trail as she approached the small clearing where Jeremiah's home sat nestled among the trees. The sound of splitting wood grew louder with each step. She found him beside a massive pile of cut logs, his axe raised above his head. His shirt was soaked with sweat, and his massive arms moved with the rhythm of someone who had been working for hours. He noticed her approach and froze. The axe remained suspended in the air as his eyes widened with something between surprise and fear. "They said, 'You eat woman.'" The words came out steady and clear, cutting through the evening silence like a blade. Jeremiah lowered his axe slowly, his massive frame seeming to shrink before her fearless gaze. He was a mountain of a man, but in that moment he looked like a lost boy. Without hesitation, Malene stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his chest. His entire body went rigid with shock. 3 years of isolation shattered in that single moment of human contact. The axe slipped from his grip and thudded into the dirt beside the woodpile. Malene stepped back from the embrace, her hand still resting on his arm. No one had touched him with kindness since the night his world burned down. "Why did you do that?" he asked, his voice a low, rough whisper. "Because you needed it." Her simple answer cut through years of self-imposed exile. Jeremiah studied her face, searching for signs of fear or disgust. He found only calm determination. "The people in town warned me about you," she said. "Said you were dangerous." Jeremiah's jaw clenched. "They're right to warn you." Malene reached into her worn leather satchel and withdrew a small photograph. The image showed a young man with kind eyes and a deputy's badge pinned to his vest. "This is my brother, Samuel. Samuel Hayes. Have you seen him?" Jeremiah's breath caught in his throat. The photograph trembled in Malene's hands as she held it toward him. 3 years of carefully guarded secrets threatened to crumble in an instant. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice shaking with a raw emotion she couldn't understand. "He sent it to me 6 months ago," she said, her hope renewed. And that's when the true twist began to unfold. Because Jeremiah didn't just know Samuel Hayes. He knew exactly where he was. The giant turned, a new light in his eyes, and began walking toward the cabin. Malene followed, her mind reeling. He opened a small trap door hidden beneath a rug. The soft lamplight flickered up through the opening. "It's all right, Samuel," he said, his voice gentle and patient. "She's here. Your sister found you." Malene heard movement below, shuffling footsteps and the creak of wooden floorboards. "Take your time," Jeremiah said. "She's not going anywhere." A figure appeared at the bottom of the ladder. Samuel Hayes looked older than his photograph, his face marked by old injuries that had healed poorly. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw. His movements were careful and deliberate. "Malene," his voice came out rough and uncertain, as if speaking required tremendous effort. But his eyes held the same kindness she remembered from their childhood. She dropped to her knees at the edge of the opening, tears streaming down her face. "Samuel, oh God, Samuel." He climbed the ladder slowly, favoring his left leg. When he reached the top, Malene threw her arms around him with desperate relief. "Thought I was dead," he whispered. "Had to think I was dead." Malene pulled back to study his scarred face. "Why? What happened to you?" Jeremiah moved to the window, his posture alert, as if expecting unwelcome visitors. 3 years ago, the Slant River Gang hit this territory," he said. "They robbed banks, burned homesteads, killed anyone who got in their way." Samuel nodded slowly, his damaged memory struggling to piece together the fragments. "I was his deputy then. We rode out to stop them." The true story of the giant began to pour out. Samuel's voice was rough but gaining strength. "They came to your house first," he said to Jeremiah. "Your wife and baby." Jeremiah's jaw clenched, but he continued his vigil at the window. "By the time we arrived, my family was already gone. The gang was waiting for us. It wasn't a random ambush. It was a setup. The stories the town told were all wrong. The giant wasn't a monster. He was a broken man who had lost everything. And that's when the next piece of the puzzle fell into place. Jeremiah saved my life," Samuel said, his voice full of gratitude. "Took care of me when I couldn't take care of myself. Fed me, helped me walk again, taught me to speak again." The hidden room below contained evidence of 3 years of patient care. Medical supplies, books, personal items. It was a sanctuary, not a prison. The town feared Jeremiah because he let them. It was better they think he was dangerous than know the truth about Samuel. Malene stood and walked to where Jeremiah maintained his watch. "You sacrificed everything to protect him," she said, her voice full of awe. "He was my deputy." Jeremiah finally turned from the window, his eyes meeting hers. "My responsibility. And your friend." The threat became clearer with each passing moment. "The gang is still out there," Jeremiah said. "Marlowe is still out there. And lately there have been signs they're moving south again." The sun began to rise. A new day, a new danger, and a new twist just waiting to be uncovered. Dawn broke over the pine trees surrounding Jeremiah's cabin as Malene prepared breakfast for 3 people instead of one. The simple act of cooking for others transformed the space from a hermit's refuge into something resembling a home. Samuel sat at the table slowly working through pronunciation exercises she had taught him the night before. The town children need proper schooling. There's no schoolhouse. Malene smiled. Then we'll make one. Jeremiah watched from the doorway as Malene worked with Samuel, her patience endless. In one night, she had accomplished what months of isolated recovery could not. Her brother's speech grew clearer with each passing hour. He started to remember more now. The gang had a hideout, he said, drawing a rough map. Canyon with red rocks. Devil's Canyon, 20 miles north. They used it as a base. Stored supplies there. Money from robberies. The sheriff, Bradley, arrived. He studied Jeremiah's face, noting the subtle changes. The constant tension had eased slightly, and his eyes held something that resembled hope. You seem different. Jeremiah nodded slowly. Maybe I am. At the mercantile, Jeremiah overheard 2 ranchers discussing stolen cattle and missing supplies. Reports of bandit activity had increased over the past month. Getting worse out there, one said. Sheriff Bradley's a good man, but he's young. Ain't seen the kind of trouble that's coming. Jeremiah paid for his supplies and headed back toward the trail. Behind him, whispered conversations followed his departure. That afternoon, Malene walked into town alone. Her confidence and direct gaze drew curious stares. She found the abandoned schoolhouse at the edge of town. Building's been empty for 2 years, Mayor Hutchkin said. Pay wasn't good enough to keep anyone. Malene examined the structure. The foundation was solid. I'd like to rent this building. The mayor was surprised. You're a teacher? I am. He squinted at her. I should warn you, not everyone in town will appreciate certain ideas about who should be educated together. Malene's smile didn't falter. Then they'll learn alongside their children. That evening, Samuel's memories continued returning in fragments. He drew rough maps of the canyon hideout. Marlowe killed your family because you were getting close to something bigger. Malene and Jeremiah exchanged a look. What do you mean? Samuel shook his head, frustrated. He wasn't just robbing banks. He was working with someone. Someone with authority. Jeremiah felt the pieces of a larger puzzle shifting into place. The threat became clearer with each detail. It's not just revenge they're after, Samuel said, the words suddenly clear. I know something that could destroy their entire operation. And that's when the final devastating truth emerged. What do you know, Samuel? Malene asked, her heart pounding. Samuel's hands shook as the final memory crashed back into his consciousness, like a dam bursting. He gripped the edge of the table, his face draining of color as 3 years of buried trauma surfaced at once. I remember everything now, he whispered. The night they killed your family, Jeremiah. Marlowe wasn't just robbing, he was meeting someone. The air in the cabin grew thick with anticipation. Who? Bradley asked, his hand instinctively going to his gun. Territorial Judge Harrison Webb, Samuel said. Marlowe's younger brother. The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. Bradley's face went white. Judge Webb has been signing every land seizure order for the past 5 years, he said, his voice flat with disbelief. Every foreclosure, every territorial expansion. Samuel nodded, his damaged memory finally providing the missing pieces. They've been stealing homesteads legally. Marlowe's gang terrorizes families until they abandon their land. Then Webb comes in and signs it over. This was no simple gang. This was a conspiracy that went all the way to the top. Samuel reached into his satchel. These, he said, pulling out a stack of documents. I grabbed these during the fight. Been carrying them ever since. The papers detailed land transfers worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Signatures, dates, and official stamps created an unbreakable chain of evidence. These documents prove the conspiracy, Samuel said, his voice stronger than it had been in years. And they make every person in this room a target for murder. Bradley stood and walked to the window, his young face aged by the weight of responsibility. There's more bad news, he said grimly. Scout reported a large group of riders moving south. At least 12 men, heavily armed. Marlowe's coming to clean up loose ends before the territorial elections next month. He looked at Jeremiah. If Webb wins the territorial Senate seat, this conspiracy becomes untouchable. Samuel struggled to his feet, his recovering body still weak but his resolve strengthening. We can't run. Too many innocent people will die if this continues. Ah, the town won't believe us, Jeremiah thought. Half of them think I'm already dangerous. Malene stopped pacing and fixed Jeremiah with a determined stare. Then we make them believe. We show them who you really are. She held out her hand. You take back your badge. You protect this town the way you protected Samuel. Jeremiah looked at the tarnished star on his mantelpiece. 3 years of guilt and isolation had convinced him he'd failed as a protector. But Samuel's survival proved otherwise. He reached out and picked up the badge. The gang will be here within days, he said. We need to send word to federal marshals. Malene had a plan. Nearest federal office is in Carson City. 3 days hard riding. I have contacts in Philadelphia. Government connections who can wire the federal authorities. Bradley shook his head grimly. Even if they believe us, federal marshals won't arrive for at least a week. Jeremiah met his gaze. Then we hold the town until they get here. Samuel limped to the window, his recovering eyesight scanning the tree line for signs of approaching danger. Marlowe knows this area, he said, his voice a low whisper. He'll use Devil's Canyon as a choke point. Then his voice dropped to almost a whisper. I didn't just witness the document exchange. I saw him murder your wife and baby with his own hands. Jeremiah's jaw clenched. Then we'll make sure he answers for it. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about justice. Bradley pinned his deputy star to Samuel's shirt. Welcome back, Deputy Hayes. Samuel straightened, his damaged body finding strength and renewed purpose. What are our chances? He asked. Jeremiah pinned the sheriff's badge to his chest, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders once again. We'll find out what this town is really made of. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, and somewhere in the distance, hoofbeats echoed through Devil's Canyon. The longest night of their lives had just begun. The transformation began at dawn. Jeremiah strode down Main Street with his badge gleaming in the morning light. No longer the feared hermit, but the returning protector. Townsfolk emerged from their shops and homes, drawn by whispers that the giant had reclaimed his star. Mayor Hutchkins stood outside the hardware store, his face a mixture of relief and apprehension. Jeremiah, Tom Bradley says we're in danger. Slant River Gang is 3 days out, maybe less. What do you need from us? Jeremiah's answer was direct. Every man who can shoot, every woman who can tend to the wounded, every child moved to safety. Word spread through Dusty Creek like wildfire. The giant was no longer their monster, but their shield against approaching darkness. Shopkeepers began boarding windows while ranchers rode in from outlying farms. Malene commandeered the schoolhouse, transforming it into a fortress and field hospital. Her organizational skills, honed through years of managing chaotic classrooms, proved invaluable for coordinating civilian defense. Samuel spread a rough map across the bar, his damaged hands steady as he marked key positions. They'll come from the North Trail. That's the only approach that provides cover for their horses. We funnel them into Main Street. Crossfire from the Mercantile and the bank building. A grim-faced rancher asked the question everyone was thinking. What about escape routes? Samuel's answer was chilling. There are none. We hold or we die. The stark reality settled over the room like a burial shroud. These men had families to protect and nowhere to run. Dr. Matthews, the town's elderly physician, emerged from his clinic carrying bags of medical supplies. I've seen what Marlowe's gang does to people. We can't let them take this town. By afternoon, Dusty Creek resembled a military camp. Barricades appeared at key intersections. Sharpshooters took positions in second-story windows. Women loaded ammunition, while children huddled in the schoolhouse cellar. Malene found Jeremiah checking rifle positions along Main Street. The telegraph line is down, she said, her voice strained. Cut sometime last night. They're closer than we thought. Samuel limped over, his face pale but determined. Found fresh horse tracks near Devil's Canyon. 12 riders, just like Bradley reported. When? Jeremiah asked. This morning. They're scouting our defenses. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Families said quiet goodbyes. Jeremiah stood in the center of Main Street, his presence a beacon of strength for the frightened townsfolk. The badge on his chest caught the fading light, a symbol of authority reclaimed. Remember, he said, his voice calm, we're not heroes, we're survivors. Stay low, conserve ammunition, and watch each other's backs. A nervous shopkeeper raised a trembling hand. What if they offer terms? Jeremiah's eyes were cold. Marlowe doesn't negotiate. He eliminates witnesses. We're in trouble. But there was a flicker of hope. The message got through before the telegraph went down, Bradley said, emerging from the bank. Help is coming if we live long enough to see it. Jeremiah climbed to the church bell tower, the highest point in town. From there he could see the northern trail winding down from Devil's Canyon. Moonlight revealed nothing but shadows and swaying trees. But somewhere in that darkness, 12 killers prepared for dawn. The wind carried the scent of rain and something else. Smoke from distant campfires. The enemy was close enough to smell their cooking. He thought about his wife and son buried in the cemetery behind the church. Their deaths had broken him, but their memory now strengthened his resolve. This town would not suffer their fate. Below him, Dusty Creek waited in armed silence. Ordinary people transformed into defenders by necessity and courage. The longest night of their lives had begun. The attack came with the first pale light of dawn, just as Samuel had predicted. 12 riders thundered down the northern trail, their horses' hooves drumming against the packed earth like war drums. Cecil Marlowe led the charge, his scarred face twisted with 3 years of accumulated rage. Jeremiah's voice boomed from the church tower, cutting through the morning air. Here they come! The gang split into 3 groups as they reached the town's edge. 4 riders circled toward the eastern buildings, while another 4 headed west. Marlowe and his remaining men charged straight down Main Street, expecting to find terrified civilians cowering behind locked doors. Instead, they found disciplined crossfire. Rifles cracked from the mercantile and bank buildings. Samuel's warnings about their tactics had prepared the defenders perfectly. The first volley dropped 2 horses and sent riders diving for cover behind water troughs and hitching posts. Marlowe's furious roar echoed off the wooden storefronts. Burn them out! His men began hurling lit torches at building facades, but who should have died 3 years ago was very much alive and fighting back. Hayes, you should have stayed dead, Marlowe screamed. Samuel's response came in the form of a precise rifle shot that splintered the wooden post inches from Marlowe's head. His damaged motor skills had improved dramatically under Maline's care, and his marksmanship remained deadly accurate. The battle raged for 2 hours as the sun climbed higher into the desert sky. The gang's superior numbers meant nothing in the narrow streets where the townspeople had every advantage. Their knowledge of each building, every alley, every rooftop gave them tactical superiority. Jeremiah descended from the church tower and moved through the town like an avenging giant. His massive frame absorbed punishment that would have felled smaller men, and his strategic mind coordinated the defense with military precision. Hold your positions! They're getting desperate! Indeed, Marlowe's men were falling back toward their horses. 3 gang members lay wounded or dead in the street. The others nursed bullet wounds and depleted ammunition supplies, but desperation made them dangerous. Marlowe pulled a stick of dynamite from his saddlebags, lighting the fuse with hands that shook from rage and adrenaline. His target was the schoolhouse where the civilians sheltered. If I can't have this town, nobody can. Samuel saw the lit explosive and broke from cover, his damaged legs screaming in protest as he sprinted across Main Street. The dynamite arced through the air toward the building where his sister coordinated the civilian defense. Time slowed as Samuel dove forward, catching the dynamite in midair and hurling it toward an empty lot behind the hardware store. The explosion shattered windows and sent debris flying, but the schoolhouse remained intact. The effort cost him everything. Samuel collapsed in the street, his body finally pushed beyond its limits. But he was smiling as Maline rushed to his side. Got it, he rasped, his eyes on the trail. Just then, they heard it, the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats thundering down the southern trail. The cavalry had arrived exactly as promised, drawn by the sound of gunfire and explosions. Marshal Thompson surveyed the scene with professional approval. Looks like you folks handled things pretty well without us. Jeremiah stood tall, his hands covered in soot and blood, but a small smile on his face. We had good leadership. 6 months later, Dusty Creek had transformed into a thriving community. The schoolhouse buzzed with children's laughter as Malene taught reading and arithmetic to students of all backgrounds. Samuel, fully recovered and walking without assistance, served as both deputy sheriff and assistant teacher. Jeremiah wore his badge with quiet pride. No longer the feared giant, but the respected protector he had always been meant to be. The townspeople, who once crossed streets to avoid him, now brought their problems directly to his office. The corruption investigation had reached all the way to the territorial capital. Judge Harrison Webb faced federal charges that would keep him in prison for decades. The forged land grants were declared invalid, and legitimate property owners reclaimed their stolen homesteads. On quiet evenings, Jeremiah visited the cemetery behind the church. The graves of his wife and son no longer filled him with consuming grief. Instead, he felt their presence as a blessing on the new family he had found. Malene approached carrying fresh flowers for the headstones. "They would be proud of you," she said softly. Jeremiah put an arm around her shoulder. "I think they'd be proud of all of us." The sun set over Dusty Creek, painting the sky in gentle pastels. Children played in streets that had once echoed with fear. Families gathered for evening meals in homes that had become sanctuaries rather than hiding places. Sometimes the most broken people simply needed someone brave enough to see their humanity. And sometimes one act of fearless compassion could transform an entire community. The giant sheriff smiled as he watched his town prepare for another peaceful night. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video.